Azbolg the Gaming Orc, and here's a video of a recent highlight from random battleground where I'm trying out Affliction. Affliction by far is still the best of all three specs for PvP and PvE. The statistics show it, the damage meters show it. I'm telling you it's that way. I played all three specs in battlegrounds, world PvP, world questing, everything, and I know Affliction is still the best. It's the easiest to play. You can actually do pretty good damage on people, even in battlegrounds. It has strengths. It's very good at single target damage, partly because I think it's so strong as it has so few hard casts. Yes, your unstable Affliction is a hard cast, and that's probably going to be one of your major damage dealers. It's definitely probably in your top 2 or top 3 major damage dealers, but it is what it is. But Affliction damage can often be dispelled. There's curses, there's magical, like you can nerf down the damage, and they've nerfed unstable Affliction so many times. It used to be very, very deadly, especially in the beginning of Legion. It would just drop, someone could dispel it, and if they allowed a Warlock to get off 5 or 6 of these casts off, well, the healer could just drop over dead from dispelling. That's all changed. Dispelling Affliction Warlocks is sort of one of the major reasons why they can be so bad. In dungeons, however, and even high-level mythics, it's all Affliction Warlocks because their single target damage on bosses is just extremely good. But this video, I really want to emphasize and talk to you about Demonology Warlocks and some suggestions on how to improve them. So from the Uldir stats, Destro and Demo were both right on the bottom. I'm talking about right near where the goblins live, deep in the caves. That's where the Demon and Destro are right now as far as damages. Besides them just acknowledging that they both need a massive damage buff. Okay, we get it. They need a damage buff. Not a big deal. But let's talk about some ways that Demonology can get it. I'm not as familiar with Destruction as I want to be, but I have played it. I know it can be pretty good and it's a lot of fun, but I'm going to just talk about Demonology in this video. Demonology was extremely underrepresented. It only had about 1,600 parses compared to like 30,000 parses, I think, for Affliction, which goes to show you, I think, the sampling bias is telling you something, or I want to say the sampling is saying, hey, Warlocks inherently know Demonology is terrible, and it also is backed by the statistical data, which is thousands of pulls and thousands of raid encounters in Uldir, and as well as the mythic data, which I linked in the previous video. And I'm acknowledging the fact that it's okay for a spec to have certain weaknesses and strengths. Like in Legion, Affliction was very strong in cleave situations typically, and it would give up. The weakness of that should be, okay, I can't do good single target damage, but if I can do group damage or cleave damage, that's really good. So there should always be a give and take whenever a spec is analyzed, or that's the way it should be for it to be balanced. You can see here in the battleground, I'm still doing top damage. Obviously, I'm still getting beat by Hunters because Hunters are just really busted right now. They're on the top, for instance, in most battlegrounds are at the very top, and also they're at the top typically in Uldir too. Survival as well, which is really interesting, which is the melee hunter is actually ranking very high as well, which is very interesting, I think, compared to, say, the Beastmaster hunters, which are the very top dogs. So Demo can do stack cleave with implosion. I'm able to do about 10 to 11,000 DPS overall. I'm talking about overall fight. At the end of the dungeon, I look at overall DPS. But if I just do single target DPS as Demonology, I'm doing about 7,000 overall. That's it. Remember, at the end of the dungeon, I'm looking at the overall damage from meters, and I look at Scata and Recount. When that's with an eye level of about 343. That's where I'm at right now. It does. I'm going to tell you where most of this damage is coming from. Most of the damage from Demonology is actually coming from your demon. And your Fel Guard does a lot of damage, and the Fel Storm does a ton of damage. That's where a majority of your damage as Demonology comes from. And I'm using the Scata data for that to figure that out. Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan does quite a lot of damage, surprisingly, as well as the Imps. And your Implosion is actually about number 4. So that's where the cleave damage is coming in with Demonology. You're doing really good. Shadow Bolt is actually way down there. It's actually a lot lower than I thought it would be. So you really want to try, whenever there is 2 mobs up, you want to try to use that are close to one another. Again, think like, okay, I'm stack cleaving these things. My Felguard's hitting with the cleave. This Fellstorm's with the cleave. So it's all like cleave, essentially stacked cleave damage is where Demonology's specialty is. But should it be the core reason Demonology? Should it be a super strength of Demonology? You know, not really. I think there should be, again, a little bit more balance, so we could have, say, more single target damage, so they're not so far behind in like the PvE encounters and mythic encounters and so forth. And that's because, like what I talked about in my previous video, the huge nerf that they got prior to BFA, the huge 30% nerf. Another one that was way down there on the list was actually Dreadstalkers. That one was really far down the list, a lot more than I thought it would be. Now, granted, whenever Dreadstalkers disappear, they do give you demonic cores, and it was a little bugged, but I'm just going to say, hey, they actually do give you the cores, so it does a little bit of supplementary damage, as well as it gives you the demonic cores when they do disappear. So the biggest takeaway I want to take about what the core damage being done by the Warlock is actually done by the Felguard, and so it's sort of single target-ish, and then he has sort of a lot of other supplementary pets and abilities which are doing okay damage. The damage starts to normalize to other classes when, again, you're getting into the stack cleave situation. But again, it just brings them to, I would think, a normal state, normal DPS state compared to other classes. They don't specifically outshine those classes, say, in stack cleave. At least that's my general observation from doing dungeons, encounters, PvP, and so forth. But this is where implosion really matters, and if maybe the Azerite traits, this is something to brainstorm as a Warlock. As you think about stacked cleave more, try to maybe emphasize that. Now, they recently just did buff, apparently, an Azerite trait for the bite ability off the Dreadstalkers, because it already does a very weak amount of damage, a lot less than I thought it would. So in other words, you're always told to like, oh, cast the Dreadstalkers to get them out and like do that. And it's actually not that important. You could actually cast the Hand of Gul'dan, which does really good damage as well. Not as much, really, probably in a single target system, but it is what it is. So really quickly, I want to talk about some improvements that could be made. Make Dreadstalkers instant cast. Every Demonology Warlock picks instant Dreadstalkers as their PvP talent. Demonology is already really highly immobile. The dungeon mechanics often require a lot of movement. Granted, some melee have to back out of area effects in some of these PvE encounters, but considering Warlock is already a really immobile class, you combine that with like all these channeled spells that Demonology has, and you have an extremely immobile class that really hurts their damage. So give Warlocks a little bit more instant cast ability to bring them up to Demonology. And a lot of other MMOs are actually pure instant cast MMOs. So a lot of like, oh, I can just counterspell you or this and that. That doesn't really exist in a lot of other MMOs. Like thinking like BDO. For world PvP or outdoor PvE, I thought about picking up my casting circle because of all the interrupts I get from these mages. Because these counterspells have huge lockout timers. Like I get hit by a feral druid, I have huge lockout timers. There's not a lot I can do, but Demonology does have a couple schools of magic, so we are not completely locked out, but it doesn't excuse the fact that melee is still riding you, and there's really not a whole lot we can do to get them off. Like I'm reading up about enhancement shamans, and they have like a pure way to like totally, it's on like a 40-second or 30-second cooldown, where they can become completely immune to melee physical attacks, which is amazing. Warlocks have a damage buffer. It's on a 2-minute cooldown though, so that seems like an issue too. Maybe that needs to be a 1-minute cooldown. Other Warlocks have suggested that. Buff the Fel Lord PvP talent. You have this huge summon demon that comes out, and it feels like it does almost no damage anymore. It does do barely any damage to melee. Tooltip says 5% every time it swings. It doesn't seem like it's doing enough, and in PvE it's okay, but it just doesn't do enough damage. Melee stand in it, and they do with like no fear basically. They're just standing in it like retards. They do get stunned by it, but they're putting out, like you can see this warrior here, they're just putting out so much damage. And warriors are another class that's doing phenomenal. Arms warriors, even in Uldir, are top, way up there on the top, and in some encounters they are the top. Back when Legion first came out, the Fel Lord would hit like a truck, man. This thing would hit like a black orc in a Mordor. It would just cream crop you. It would hit about 1 million damage, crit hit, physical damage. You have to stand in a circle. You have a 20-foot demon swinging a super powerful axe. It's one of the really cool reasons why you want to play Demonology. The problem is now is these melee are just sitting in it because it doesn't do any damage. It doesn't seem to do anything, and I'm sure they maybe adjusted it for arena, but to be totally frank with you, it's really just not that good of a spell. Like a rogue could, I think, vanish and sap the demon. You know, there's ways to play around it. It's not, in the end, it's probably not going to be that good of a talent, but if the huge demon is out, let it be out, let it work, let it do a lot more damage. The damage that it does should be scaled based on the Warlock's gear, not just a flat, like, oh, I'm doing 5% damage. That's really not how good damage is done, really, and I think that's how Warlocks, those two talents, like with the Observer and the Fel Lord, are not going to play out that well in World PvE and PvP or BGs, arenas, whatever you want to call it. They're actually going to descale because the whole idea is like, oh, I'm doing just a fixed amount, and stamina already seems to be going up quite a bit, rather than, oh, my mastery goes up a lot and I can't do a lot of damage. So these pets, these huge pets that cost shards, need to be buffed significantly. I'm about halfway through what I want to talk about, and you can see I'm actually top damage. Some hunters are beating me. Big surprise there. So we're going to go show you another video here real quick. So a simple solution would just be to buff the overall damage by some amount. Let's just say 10%, and you can scale it up if you need to from there. But really, you're probably going to need a much more significant buff to try to make Demonology on par with other damage classes in general. I mean, hunters are already doing good, I think, AoE damage. You're not going to do good damage unless you can both do cleave damage and non-cleave damage. So Demonology probably overall needs a big buff, as well as destruction. I think Affliction's actually in a good spot, and if we were to get, say, up to that spot, and then we had that stack cleave damage, destruction, Demonology would be good. Demonology is already super hard to play, and I think that's why a lot of Warlocks and that parse data was also so low. It's because it is a difficult class to play, but that difficulty should be rewarded with more damage. My overall thoughts too is that, like, the lighter armor you wear in this game, the more damage you should do. So like, you got mages, warlocks, shadow priests, they should all be doing super top damage because they are more squishy, they're more vulnerable to melee players. Then you got rogues and feral druids that should be, and yeah, you can go into bear form as feral druid, there can be more dynamics, but overall they should be doing less damage than those cloth wearers. And then there should be trade-offs. You can have mismatches, like rogues are really good against warlocks, but rogues are not that good against warriors typically. But the overall concern is that, you know, if you're wearing lighter cloth, you have a channeled spell, you should be doing a lot more damage than what you should be doing, because there's trade-offs, there's risks and rewards that need to be in play. Then you'd have like mail and plate wearers, which would have less damage. But again, if they want to play like a Fury Warrior, they used to be able to take more damage, again, to do more damage. Here's another point. The longer channeled cast you do, the more damage you should do. So if you're sitting back for 10 seconds casting a spell, most of the time your opponent's going to be out of range, but you should be doing a lot of damage. And even that matches up with dungeon mechanics, because most of the time people are moving, or trash mobs that die within like 10 seconds. So I'm thinking of like Demon Bolt should do its base damage, unchanneled or whatever, should just be doing, or a channeled cast of Demon Bolt should be doing a lot more damage. Now, I did try the spec out, even with Pleasure Through Pain, with all the pieces of gear to do that the channeled cast off of 30% Dreadstalker summons, and it didn't really work in PvP. It's like, you might as well play Destruction. That's so sad, because it should have been like a really powerful single target. I even put the weak aura alert up, it just didn't work. And so the reason why those channeled casts should be rewarded too is because they can be countered so easily in this game. People just cast an instant cast ability, and you get locked out. Like a mage will lock you out for 6 seconds or something crazy. So, and every class has like a base silence, except for warlocks, and we're going to get to that in a second. Give warlocks in general a baseline silence. Every class has it, especially with Demonology, where the developers have seen to push the Felguard onto us. And a lot of encounters in Mythic require silence, and in PvP, the silence is also really powerful. And silence has become a very important mechanic for mitigating damage, especially in like Mythic Plus. And almost every class in the game has a baseline silence. Why don't Warlocks have this? Yes, we can use the Fel Hunter, but with Demo, the Fel Guard is where it seems to be. In PvE, some mobs seem to be immune to stun, but not silence, which is kind of strange. Give the Fel Guard an uppercut pummel or something like that, similar to Warriors. Hell, you can even put it on a longer, like 1 minute cooldown, but it gives us something. It gives us an interrupt of some kind using that. But a baseline silence ability in line with other classes, that would be great. If you want to have Warlocks do less damage, it has to be traded off with more survivability. So back in Legion, they had, in Demonology, I specifically remember, because what gave Demonology more tankiness is they had Dark Pack on a different line than they had, where you could actually pick up Demon Skin and have Dark Pack, which was great, because you would give up Death Coil essentially, right? But you could get Dark Pack, so you could have more tankiness, which I think fits the fantasy of it more. So the idea is you swap Dark Fury, which is a spell pretty much you never cast, maybe in like Mythic Dungeons or something you want to get that cooldown down, and you swap that for Dark Pack. So there has to be a trade-off. If you don't want to have Warlocks do as much damage, give them more survivability, so when melee or a hunter jumps on them, they just don't roll over and die. It kind of more is equally matched. Blizzard probably needs to buff the piss out of hardcast pets. So like Vile Fiend, Dreadstalkers, non-instant Dreadstalkers, Nether Portal, all the damage on these pets feels really lackluster and requires shards. The damage should be buffed on all these significantly. Again, channeled spells equal big damage. That's how the trade-off needs to go, because like I can get that, especially in PvP where it can be silenced or countered. That needs to be in a major effect. Fix the pet AI. This pet should just never be standing around. If I tell the pet to attack, let it go and attack. If a target's selected and I hit the pet attack, the pet should just go buck wild crazy and get on something. Having the demon's damage kind of be more sticky is what I want to say, and like basically auto connect. So like there's never like missed damage really. The demons get on you. I see the demons. Yes, if they get feared off me and they don't connect, that has probably a lot to do with the programming, and that might be pretty challenging to do, but making the demon's damage stick helps out. Buff the Fel Guard strike to probably like 20%. Mobility isn't a major issue. Pets can move and we can't catch up to them as a Warlock, so I don't really complain about the mobility as much, because we give it up for damage really. I think that's the trade-off, and a Druid can run out of the way. I put a lot more information in the description of this video. I'm running out of time. This is the second one I've shown you. The video is already kind of long. Like, subscribe, comment. I'll see you guys in the next battleground.